Hi, I'm Tawny Plattis, and you're listening to Dirty Bits, the show that covers the sexy, scandalous, and salacious stories from history your teacher probably left out. We'd like to welcome our newest love bugs to the podcast. There were so many of you this week. We're so glad that you're enjoying the show and wanted to read some of the incredibly sweet things you wrote in. Raza Mataz from Australia sent us a message on facebook.com/dirtybitspodcast saying, "Love the show, mate. I've been following you and George since you started. Wish you'd have been my history teacher. You guys rock. May you both keep shining. You brighten a lot of people's lives with your great sense of humor, and you gotta keep the ball rolling and keep the dream alive." Devin Panda Murphy said on facebook.com/dirtybitspodcast, "I fell for the dirty bits, not only because of the fun, interesting, and often LGBT-related facts, but it's partially because of the way Tawny tells the stories the way I do. This podcast is the literal best. They are also open to being corrected." Shane Waters said on my personal Facebook page, "As a fellow podcaster, I have to admit, I don't listen to podcasts regularly anymore. However, I did give a couple of your episodes a listen today and just wanted to drop in and say great job." Thanks, Shane. Noelle gave us 5 stars on iTunes and said, "We tend to forget that famous people can have a lot of quirks and aren't quite as wholesome as others would have us believe. This podcast examines those quirks in a fun and hilarious fashion. I highly recommend giving it a listen." Dan Lefebvre gave us 5 stars on iTunes and said, "Tawny does a great job bringing the things in history that don't get talked about much to life." Subscribe, sit back, relax, and learn more about the dirty bits of history. And Mike Cosgrove gave us 5 stars and practically begged us to do an episode on James Joyce for the love of all things dirty bits. We hear you, our friend, and are looking into the flatulence-loving man now. Be sure to join in on the Dirty Bits discussion on our Facebook page, facebook.com/dirtybitspodcast. And join in on our Facebook discussion group, the Dirty Bits Podcast group, where we post art history memes and talk all things historically filthy. You can connect with us on Instagram too, at Dirty Bits Podcast, and Twitter at The Dirty Bits Pod. You can also leave us a review on Facebook or iTunes. We love talking with our listeners and would be delighted if you joined in with us. You might even get a shout out on our next episode. All of our links are available in the show notes here and on our website, tawnyvoice.com/dirtybits. We've also joined the Orbital Jigsaw Network, along with some other shows we think you'd like Concession Stand, a high-energy, fast-paced, 1-hour weekly show full of quips, jokes, and updates on all things geek-attainment, centered around TV, movies, video games, and pop culture. Check it out at orbitaljigsaw.com. Many of you have, in fact, requested longer, bigger, more frequent episodes. We would absolutely love to bring the show to you full-time. And if that's something you would like to see, you can help us work towards making that a reality by visiting us at patreon.com/dirtybits and becoming an official Dirty Birdie. A giant thank you to our newest Dirty Birdies who have donated on Patreon. Stacy Benedict, who gets an extra Patreon-exclusive episode featuring Nzinga, Queen of Ndongo and Matamba. And thanks to our other new patrons, Hannah Ostick, Justin Ruff, Les Gebhardt, Thor Michael Wood, Aaron Kurland, Dennis Sarah, and the True Crime Fan Club. We are seriously overwhelmed by your generosity and are so excited to start sending you all of the patron-only goodies we have for you. Every one of your contributions to the show means so much, especially to those who aren't able to donate, and George and I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. Enjoy the show. The myth, the legend, the subject of plays, memes, and a French TV series. This was a bit of a tougher topic for the Dirty Bits. It's easy to romanticize the 17th century swordswoman and opera singer, Julie d'Aubigny, or as she was called, Mademoiselle de Maupin. Fact and fiction often intertwine, and many sources are in French. As always, if you have any corrections for us, please reach out in the comments section or email Tawny@tawnyvoice.com. Again, I speak French worse than a 4-year-old, so bear with my less than perfect pronunciation. Julie d'Aubigny was basically Arya Stark, with a little Miley Cyrus streak and some Ronda Rousey sprinkles on top. A French woman born around 1673, her father was the secretary to the King Master of Horse, the Count. She may have actually lived in the very first riding school in Paris before moving to Versailles in 1682, spending her childhood in the stables. But it wasn't horseback riding that Julie demonstrated her prodigy. Her father was an illustrious swordsman and trained her alongside the boys. She dressed like her male peers and kicked all of their asses. So by the time she's 14, which as we know is the peak of maturity, she becomes the mistress of the master of the horse. And at some point he goes, okay, this is fun and all, but let's find you a husband. And he arranges for her to be married to Sieur de Maupin, who was this wishy-washy, meek type of dude, so I can only imagine what he made of the spitfire that was Julie. There are actually some sources that say he was sent off to the provinces to take up everyone's favorite job as tax collector the morning after his wedding to Julie. And Julie was like, okay, have fun, I'm gonna stay here in Paris, bye. So Julie gets bored of the horse master she's rolling around in the hay with, and then runs off with the fencing master, who goes by the name of Suran. But Suran was a bit of a bad boy. He had killed a man in an illegal duel, so the Lieutenant General of Police, Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, is after him, and the couple books it to the city of Marseille. They had this whole Tommy and Gina story. They were really down on their luck. It was tough. So tough. They earned a little bit of cash from giving fencing demos at fairs and bars just to get by. One time this drunken bastard goes, "There's no way that's a woman. That's a guy in a dress. This is bullshit. No woman is that good at fencing." To which she promptly took off her shirt, raised an eyebrow, and I'm assuming said, "How about dim titties?" And she was such a fantastic performer, she began her singing career with the Marseille Opera under her maiden name, d'Aubigny. She was popular and admired, especially by one young woman in particular. And Suran is like, "Are you serious? You're gonna just run off with her and leave me?" And Julie goes, "Oh, I'm super serious." So the two ladies fell in love. And when the girl's parents found out, they were aghast and threw all their daughter's shit in a couple of suitcases and shipped her off to a convent in Avignon. To which Julie went, "Ha!" and then proceeded to follow her beloved to the convent as a postulate, or someone interested in joining the convent. So one night, Julie and her girlfriend wait until it's really late, and they steal the body of a recently deceased elderly nun. They put the body in the girl's cell and set the convent on fire because fuck the police, and they run away together. They were Bonnie and Clyding it for 3 months until Julie was sentenced to death by the Parliament in Provence. Interestingly, under the name Sieur de Maupin, because the judges just couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that a woman had abducted another woman from a convent. So Julie was charged, as a male, mind you, with kidnapping, body snatching, arson, and failing to appear before the tribunal. Her sentence was death by fire. While her girlfriend was returned to her parents, Julie hightailed it for Paris, wearing men's clothing again. So she's going along in all her badassery and quite literally bumps into the Count d'Albert, a nobleman with an enormous stick up his ass. Believing her to be a man, he challenges her to a duel, dare his honor be besmirched by a shoulder brush. So she naturally fucks him up, driving the blade of her sword through his shoulder and wins the duel. And as he's lying there in the street, bleeding out, she cocks her head to the side and goes, "You're kinda cute." And she nurses him back to health in this total sexy nurse fantasy trope. And he supposedly became the greatest romance of her life. While that part was a bit unclear in the sources, they at least became lifelong friends. So after the Count d'Albert starts feeling better, he has to return to his military unit. Julie meets Gabriel Vincent Thevenard, who is also a singer, and begins an affair with him. And Gabriel is like, "Oh my God, we're such good singers. We've trained together with this Marshall guy. We should totally go join the Paris Opera." But Julie says, yeah, about that. Kind of on the run for kidnapping, body snatching, arson, and failing to appear before the tribunal. And they want to burn my ass at the stake. Just let me make a phone call first. So she gets in touch with her old lover, the horsemaster, and goes, "Hey, so I'm back in Paris. How are you?" And anyway, I was wondering what you could do to pardon that little itty-bitty indiscretion I made a while ago they want to set me ablaze for now. And the horsemaster, being chill as fuck, goes, "I got you, boo, don't worry about it." And he, her first love, actually convinces the king to pardon her for all of her crimes. So her boyfriend Gabriel auditions for the opera, and everyone goes, "He's fantastic! You're hired on the spot! Yes! Oh my God, yes! Welcome to Juilliard!" And he goes, "Yes, yes, yes, I'm incredible, but you can only have me if you also take my girlfriend, Julie." And the opera goes, "Is that non-negotiable? Do we really need him? I mean, he's really good." And Gabriel goes, "Non-negotiable, bitches." So they reluctantly take on the 17-year-old Julie. Yes, she has experienced all of this shit before the age of 17. So Julie, they take her into the opera, and she finds herself a member of one of the world's greatest musical companies. She went on to become a star. She became La Maupin, and went on to appear in all of the opera's major productions from 1690 to 1694. She first sang as a soprano, and then in her more natural contralto range. The Marquis de Dangeau wrote in his journal in 1701 that La Maupin had the most beautiful voice in the world. Mademoiselle de Maupin, as she was called, was on top of the world. She had this beautiful voice, she could act, she had this sexy androgyny thing going on way before it was cool in the 80s, and the audience positively adores her. But that's not so much the case with her castmates. There's this famous story where she beat the crap out of Louis Goulard de Menzy because he was, quote-unquote, pestering the women members of the troupe. And she was not about to abide by that shit. She'd get into these battles of wits with her boyfriend that people would gossip about all over Paris. She then fell in love with another singer, who was already the mistress of the fucking Grand Dauphin, heir to the fucking throne of France, and tried to commit suicide when she faced rejection. Unfortunately, her career came to a screeching halt when she was at a court ball dressed as a man. She kissed a young woman on the dance floor, and 3 different noblemen became incredibly threatened by something so egregious that they challenged her to a duel. So Julie goes, "Cash me outside, how about that?" Which they did. And she fought them all at once, beat them all at once, like she was Neo from the fucking Matrix, and once again had to dip out of the city because the king had outlawed duels and she made her way to Brussels. She there met up with the Elector of Bavaria, and much like a Scotch on the rocks, he found her a bit too much to handle. While giving a performance on stage, she stabbed herself with a real dagger. And the Elector goes, "This bitch be crazy." And he gave her 40,000 francs to leave him the fuck alone, to which she responded by throwing them at the feet of his emissary and set off to Madrid mad as hell, where she got a job working for the Countess Marino, who she could not stand. She so loathed the Countess that she put radishes in her hair before a ball so that everyone but the Countess could see her. And before the Countess even got back home, Julie was back on her way to Paris. Julie was once again pardoned for her crimes and returned to the stage. She performed at Versailles, as well as starred in most of the Paris Opera's productions, and even introduced the idea of the Italian contralto voice to France. And in true Mademoiselle Maupin fashion, she defended chorus girls against creepers, threatened to splatter the Duchess of Luxembourg's brains against the wall, and ended up in court for attacking her landlord. We've all been there. One night, on stage, she bit her boyfriend's ear so hard it bled, and they were infamous for their fiery spats. It was then in 1703 when she fell very deeply in love with Madame la Marquise de Florensac, who is called the most beautiful woman in France. She was also the most famous, wealthy, and well-connected woman in the country. In fact, she was so beautiful, she had to escape to Brussels for years because the Dauphin was obsessed with her. There are some accounts that state that Julie and La Florensac lived in paradise together for 2 years, until La Florensac died of a fever. Julie was devastated. She entered a convent, somewhat ironically, and died at the age of 33. One biographer wrote, "She was destroyed by an inclination to do evil in the sight of her God and a fixed intention not to. And her body was cast upon the rubbish heap. She has no known grave." Théophile Gautier was asked to write a story about Julie, but instead he created the novel, Mademoiselle de Maupin. Published in 1835, he took aspects of the real La Maupin and named some of the characters after her friends. The main character was viewed through a kind of all-for-love sort of mirror. The character d'Albert and his mistress Rosette are both in love with the androgynous Théodore de Serrans, who's actually Madeleine de Maupin, and neither couple is privy to the fact. Then in 1922, the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice, led by our very own Anthony Comstock, arrests the bookstore owner, employee Raymond D. Halsey, for selling the obscene novel Mademoiselle de Maupin by Théophile Gautier, which depicted adultery and homosexuality. Though Julie's life was cut tragically short at the age of 33, it was filled with more adventure than most people could have experienced in 3 lifetimes. She lived her life on her terms, and rarely, if ever, was beholden to anything besides her own wants and desires. Or she may have just been a sociopath. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or corrections,